Okay, so we're back and I have input all of these values in there. Just in case you were following from the last video on inputting all this data, I have my hotkey set up on my push to talk as numlock, and the numlock triggers the keyboard to allow OBS to record my microphone. So unfortunately, whenever I push to talk, it screws up my numlock. So if you saw any of these values doing funny things right before I left, that's why. Anyway, you'll see that all of these values match everything over here. And one thing to keep in mind about this is you have to be really careful to make sure that there's no extra spaces or anything in here. Like this here might be an extra space. Nope, it isn't. Make sure that you have 0 before your decimal places. I think that's it. So I'm going to save this. I guess I already did. I didn't change anything. Now we're going to close this. Now I'm just going to turn a couple of laps here just so I can get some spring deflections in a telemetry file, and then we'll go look at that. So just bear with me while I turn a couple of laps here. You'll notice on the screen here that my telemetry isn't activated yet. I have a hotkey for this, and we're going to follow this procedure that I told about taking telemetry. Turn telemetry on, you'll see it flash here. There's a hotkey for it. I'm going to back up out of my pit stall here. Hopefully make this guy do his thing. Yep, there he goes. Try to drive this thing out of the pits and do some laps. Gotta punch the brake here to calibrate it. There we go. If you watch closely, I might end up using the brake here in case I get loose on exit and just trail brake, but hopefully we don't have to do that. I'll use a little brake on entry here. Again, I'm just trying to get some telemetry, so I'm not going to drive ridiculous. So I have an OBS recording and I'm getting 120 frames per second. That's pretty good on short screens. Let's see what it does there. A little brake saved it. So we're going to fix that entry. I know what's going on, but a couple of clean laps here, sorry.
31.06.
Trail braking that exit there a little bit. I have the weather really hot.
30.227.
So you get loose here, I'll just drag the brake a little. Just do one more. That should be good. We don't care about tire temps, we just want to see the springs anyway. Yes, I speed down pit road. Yeah, whatever. Okay, so we got some telemetry. I'm a bad driver. Well, not a bad driver, I'm a mediocre driver, but that was pretty bad. Alright, so let's turn on MU here so it'll register my telemetry. Yeah, I have a bunch of stints that I've been running the last few days for the public setup. Now I'm going to pull open Motec here to pop on my other screen. Okay, so here's Motec. I'm going to show you the telemetry here. So this is what I just did. I always check the time just to make sure. Some bad laps. I think I took some from last night too, but I don't want to chance it. You really need more data than this, but I just want to show what happens here. So this is, I have stuff for rake computations for the left splitter height and the right splitter height. I have all the ride heights, G-force lat. I use this to, you can see where I'm breaking the hell out of it right here. Anyway, so I'm going to go inside of the, which one are we trying to do here? Oh, we're trying to look at the springs. So in here, I have all these different workbooks and whatnot. So you should have these as well if you loaded Motec up from one of my previous videos and downloaded all the stuff. So this workbook, this is the springs workbook, okay? I don't know which one of these laps is better than the other. This lap 2. So I input all the stuff for all of these constants. And you can see those. It's been a little bit here. Somebody will know where these are faster than I do. Here's the maths. And down here in the maths, so under tools, and then maths, and then constants. So here's all the data that I input in that XML file or whatever it was, text file. You can also do it here and just type them in, but I find it to take way longer. I have stuff for the computations for the splitter, roll, rake, all this other stuff, but we're concerned about these. So here's all of our constants. So the next thing I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to see how much deflection I'm getting out of these springs. So I'm just going to play this. You can see that these charts were off the chart here. I'm going to pause this. I'm going to come over into this window here. This is the splitter height. I'm going to hit F6 and we're clipping. The graph is clipping, so I got to fix that. So I'm going to right click in this graph, hit properties, and then you will see that there are there should be minimum and max values. So the max value is set to 2, so I'm going to set that to 7. Well, the splitter won't be that high, sorry. 4. 4. Every time I hit numlock, every time I hit my mic, it turns numlock off. I gotta remember to use the other buttons, the other number buttons. There we go. I changed the wrong thing. Anyway, so this is what the splitter's doing. It looks like the left side's up. It's easier to see with the track map on. So the red dot in the track map, you can see splitter's level there. In the corner, it's pretty good, and then it's kind of lifting the left front up. But I have it set up that way because as the run goes on, the right side will come up. So I actually start with it inverted. But anyway, we're here for springs. So these over here are the dampers, and these are just basically bar graphs with minimum and maximums. So sometimes I will do this. Right click and hit properties and hit calculate. And then it'll reconfigure these so that they're working, so that the stuff shows up within. Now when you play this, it'll do this. So you can see that it goes from 3.3 to 5.8. Nice. Now, what we kind of need to know is we need to know what the minimum and well, we need to know where the shock spring comes into play. So to know where the shock spring comes into play, it is the bottom 4 inches of the shock. So I'm going to go back to iRacing. So the shock starts out with a 3.17 deflection. Oops, the shock starts out with a 0.82 right here. So the maximum the shock can travel is 5¼ inches. So we know that we should be hitting the shock spring. Oh, it's been a while since I've done this. The shock spring should engage at 4 inches, not 4.82. And over here, no, I take that back. The shock spring engages at 4.82 here and 7.57 here. So you take whatever this number is and you add 4 to it because the shock is already deflected. So with the shock deflected, the spring sitting on top of it engaged 4 inches from this point. So, and maybe somebody can message me if I have that wrong, but that's how I've always done it. I hope it's right. Anyway, I'm not a real car fabricator, but so what we're going to do is we're going to take this and we're going to go into our Motec and we're going to set these values so that there's a warning that shows up when we get into the shock spring. So on the front left, we know, I'm going to assume that the shock spring kicks in at 7.57. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the minimum on that display at 3.57. So right here, here's the scale. I'm going to put 3.7 in there. .44. Okay, so now what we need to do is set the warning 4 inches above this. So when the shock compresses, when the thing deflects and gets into this 7.57, it'll flash yellow, which means we're on the shock spring. Go back in here and there is color bands. And then in here you edit this. So I want to specify the range. So I want this to trigger when it gets to 3.57 plus 4, so 7.57. And then that'll go until 11.57. So according to this, we're never on the shock spring, or I messed this up. This is really bothering me, trying to figure out if I did this right. I think it's, okay, sorry. I'll try to edit that part of the video out here. The way you get to the shock spring is you take the max deflection and you take the last 4 inches of it out. So it's not the bottom. It's this is the bottom. So when it's fully compressed, it's traveled 9.44 inches. So you take the 9 and you subtract 4 from it, which is why that wasn't making any sense. Sorry about that. So we want to be at 5.44 to 9.44, which means that last 4 inches of the shock is in the shock spring. Sorry about that. So we need to come back in here and we need to change this. Well, it's 2 screens, makes this easier. 9.44. Stupid number lock. Okay. So there we go. Okay, so basically right when it lands in turn 1, it hits the shock spring on the left front. But doesn't stay on it for very long. Part of that might be because I'm coil binding the shock spring, to be honest. Doesn't make sense, so it would be fully compressed. Whatever. So we're on the shock spring. So let's do the right side. I think what's happening here is it's the right side that coil binds, which I'll show you. The left side is just completely run out of travel, and it might be hitting the track. But we do engage the shock spring here right at the bottom of the bump into turn 1. I know this video is dragging on a little bit, but I'm a little rusty here. So we're going to do the right front. We're going to take, okay, so shock's only 5 1/4, 0.82. I'm going to leave a little bit in there so it doesn't go all the way down. And then in the color band, so it's going to be, the shock spring is going to engage, which makes sense because I have a 3 3/4 inch packer in there, so it's going to consume almost the whole tower on the shock, the piston, or the shaft, sorry. So this is going to engage at 1 1/4 inch. So 5.25. This thing will be on the shock spring the whole way. You can see they're working together. Pretty good. But what I know right now, okay, so the reason I wanted to look at this is when you look at the, when you drive that car into the corner, it's already on the shock spring and it basically runs out of travel. So initially I was talking to a good friend of mine who's a DWC driver and we're like, oh, it's hitting the track, but it isn't. The left side is just a little bit, but when you look at the overview on this and you look at the splitter heights, we're not into the splitter at all. One easy way to do that is to look at the center splitter height. I don't know if I have that turned on in anything. I probably should. Well, since we're doing this, I'll show you how to add a channel to this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click in here, go to properties, then I'm going to add a channel. I'm going to look for the splitter That's the center front splitter ride height. So if you don't trust these values for your right and your left, you can always look at the center. Hit F6 to expand this. So supposedly that's where the splitter is. Just want to make sure this is in inches. Yeah. So we're not hitting the track, supposedly. But we're on the shock springs really hard, so I think what we got to do is I'm going to go in here and I'm going to drop this shock spring down. I'm going to drop this thing down to like, I'm probably going to take 2 inches out of this. But then I'm going to use 5,000 pound spring rate. I guess when I did my test, I already had the 5,000 pound spring in there, but previously I only had a 500, so we'll just do that and see if it changes anything. I wish you could just type these in. So I'm going to take telemetry quick. This is how the setup is shared on the forum with 3.75. So now I have that in there. This thing is pretty much tapped out, the splitter, because you take 4 inches out of that, and we're already at 0.82, so 1 1/4, you get like a 1/2 inch of travel on the shock before you into the shock spring. So I believe what'll happen now is our splitter height will be down on the ground. So I just turn a couple of laps here. Oops, forgot telemetry. See if I can drive better.
.158.
You notice I put my foot on the brake right there a little bit to help stabilize the car.
.204.
We'll bring it in this lap here.
29.278.
It's pretty amazing. You just tap that brake a little bit and it'll straighten the car right out. I do this out of habit. So used to taking tire temps and stuff that I get in here as quick as possible. You're supposed to hit the pit stall, but whatever. Okay, so let's go and load up that telemetry. Oh yeah, we're clear into the shock springs now completely. But look at the splitter heights over here. This is way better. Way, 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 way better. We're down in the 0.2 range. 0.2, 0.4 before I was up in the ones, I believe. Yeah, look at that. The thing was way up in the air. This is another thing I'll do. I'll just set my, just real quick, I'm going to show you what I do with the camera here. You can set a hotkey for this, and I set my Z value down to 0 from the rear chase, and you can see it clip in the track. You can see this thing is way up in the air. That's ridiculous. That's not fast. And then in this one, this is where I took all that packer out. You can see that we're a lot closer to the track. But now I think we're coil bound in the spring. So there's some happy medium between there. But anyway. So this is, we're into this a half an hour. I apologize for that. But you can see the difference between these. So I'm going to set this lap and I'm going to set this black. And you can see them side by side now. Red is the fast one, the second run, and black is the first run. So we're getting more left front spring travel. Sorry, we're clearing the splitter right off of the charts on both of these because it's lifting so much. But the splitter's coming down more, so see how much lower it is? This is where these tools really get helpful. I suspected that packer was in the 5,000, so I had a 5,000 spring shock spring, right? I had a 5,000 pound shock spring in here and a 3.75 packer. So the reason I put the 5,000 pound shock spring in there because I intended to lower the packer down and I forgot to do that before I would launch the test session. So I answered, you actually got to see the answer and why I was doing that because I wanted to know if I was really getting into the shock spring or not at all and if it was bottoming out the shock spring. It looks like it is because look at how much lower the splitter goes. The only way the splitter can drop like this versus this one, all we did different here was reduce the shock spring rate. So when we reduce the shock spring rate and the splitter come down, that means that we're compressing the hell out of the shock spring, right? So it's probable that we are actually binding that shock spring because we're not hitting the track. And I haven't done the math to check to actually see if that's happening, but you can see over here, this is the our math for flashing yellow whenever we're on the shock spring. When you play this thing, look at this thing is always in the shock spring. And that's because we have 500 pound springs and we're trying to drop the front of the car 4 inches. So I just wanted to show you that and let you see how this could be really useful for you. It expedites doing tuning. I'm sort of backwards on some stuff here, but I'll just post it the way it is. Hello everybody. Well, in this session I'm going to show you how to take all the settings from the garage and input them into the Spring maths in Motec. So the program that I have open here is Notepad++. You can also use just regular Notepad, but I like Notepad++ because of the way it color codes things. I do some programming for CAD, honestly. Anyway, so I have two monitors here in the background, but you can only see the one that I capture. So what I need to do here is I want to edit the maps for the garage. So in my documents folder here, I have the spring travel hammer. It's in the documents, Motec, and I have a folder called math save as, but it could be in custom maths. You'd have to check to see where you have that saved. So I'm going to, I just go through here to go to documents, and then I scroll down to Motec, and then I have these maths. These are the maths that get referenced into Motec, which I'll show you in a minute. So these are all the constants that are going to get used. So what I'm going to do is open this in Notepad++, and you can see in here that these are all the math constants that Bob set up for me. So this is the left front shock deflection. This is the maximum. So this is what it's showing in the garage. That is 3.57. Okay, welcome back. So this video follows the previous video on, of course it follows the previous video, but the previous video on how to input springs from the garage. So we were looking at the maths, this Excel file. That is not what I wanted to do. I want to open this with Notepad++. I have input all the values here. So there might have been some funky stuff that was happening. You got to understand what you don't know is that I have OBS running on a second monitor, and in order to get it to do push to talk, I have a program called Joy to Key running in the background. In Joy to Key, every time I use the push to talk, it hits the number lock button. That number lock button is registered in OBS as push to talk. It's one of the few buttons that works. It's a sidebar and my dog in the background. So every time I hit number lock, it was probably screwing up these numbers when I was typing before. I wasn't trying to hide anything. So here's the real numbers. And I just copied those out of the IR garage. These are a little different. This had a 5,000-pound shock spring in it, but I took some telemetry while I stepped away, and I'm going to show you what I'm trying to accomplish here. So we're done here. So I have two bits of telemetry. I'm not going to go over how to take telemetry and whatever, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the results of taking the telemetry. You can go watch one of the other videos on how to do that. So I have these 2 bits of telemetry. This up here had, so I'll show you what was in the garage when I did this. This is the session. These laps had a 5,000-pound right front shock spring. This is the exact same setup with a 500-pound right front shock spring. What I was trying to do is find out how much I am compressing the shock spring with a big packer and no rate to it. So in order to do that, I wanted to see what happened. So I put a 5,000-pound in there to prevent it from compressing the shock spring. And then I dropped it down to 500, and then we'll go look at the splitter and look at a bunch of stuff related to that. So in here, I loaded up those 2 pieces of data, telemetry files. And the first one has the 5,000-pound shock spring in it at 706. And the second one has a 500-pound shock spring, and they're a second. The fast laps are a second apart, and you'll see why. So the red, let's just look at what we have over here. This did not load this way. I had this, and it changes every time you load this, but once you get that notepad file set up, you need to come in here and modify these damper position windows and sometimes these. Usually it's just these two. So what you need to do is right click on, so you can click on this or click on this, and then right click on it and hit properties. Now once I get in here, this is the channel information. This channel information is the minimum and maximum shock that you can take directly from the IR garage. So this is the left front, FL is front left, FR is front right, FL. So I'm looking to figure out my scale of the bars so that 0 means that I'm not on the shock at all, and 9.44 means the shock is completely compressed, which technically you can't do because there's a shock spring in here that consumes some space. So I go to the iRacing garage, and as usual, I have all these things open at once. Here we go, 3.57 and 9.44. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll set this a little bit lower than that when I'm completely off, so it'll be 3.50. Whatever. So we're just going to leave this like this. See the number lock again. I got to remember to use those other keys. Now, the color bands, this is where I created a warning. If you don't have this in your Motec or whatever, you just hit add, and then you pick the color, and then you tell it the minimum and the maximum. And what this warning is this is the last 4 inches of the total shock deflection available. So we know that the maximum shock deflection is 9.44, okay? So if the maximum shock deflection is 9.44 and the shock spring consumes the last 4 inches of it, all you have to do is subtract 4 from 9.44 to get to 5.44, and that gives you your I'm in the shock spring. So if this compresses and hits 5.44, it's going to flash yellow, and it's going to stay yellow for the entire range. So the bar scale, so as the shock comes down, it comes down from not being used, it approaches 3, 4, 5, and once it hits this, it flashes yellow. So I set that one. I'm not going to go through how I did it over here, but it's the same thing. The maximum in the garage was 5 1/4. I took 4 inches away from that, and that's 1 1/4. It's 0.82 in the garage, but I set it at 0.75. Sometimes I do that, like I said. So if you think about it, we only have like a 1/2 inch before we're into the shock spring on the right front, because of the 5 1/4, 4 1/4, well, 4.25 to 5.25 is all shock spring. I'm already at 0.8, right? So let's watch what happens. So this little red dot is me. There is only one little spot here where this right front is not in the shock spring. So this thing is doing nothing but compressing. So I'm going to go fast with this. So look at, we get into the corner. So this thing is, it's a maximum is like right here, 3 inches. So we're compressing the shock spring about 30% or half of the shock spring. So we're definitely not maxing it out, but we're also not, in theory, hitting the track. Now I'm going to show you what happens when we load up the other setup. So this is going to be my base, the fast one with the 500-pound shock spring. When I click the black, that puts black bars for this other one right next to it. So what you see here is that we are compressing the 500-pound shock spring more than the 5,000-pound shock spring. So we're getting more travel. So this is pinning the right front up in the air. You can see that over here. This is the splitter heights. If I hit F6, you'll see. So the black is the 5,000-pound shock spring. The red and the green is the 500, which is none. If you look at these splitter heights, we're down here at 0.3, 0.7. Not hitting the track, supposedly, if I have this right. One thing we can do is we can go and I'm going to add the center splitter channel. So I right click in this graph, go to properties, and I want to add a channel, the middle. So I add a channel, And I've already searched for this, but you can just type in CFS because I know that's the code for it. Double click on that and now it'll show up in here. But you can see why I don't do that, because now there's 3 lines and it's hard to see what's going on. So I'm going to undo that. Right. So this is what we can take away from this. With a 5,000-pound shock spring, we're jamming the right front of the car up into the air, and it's holding the left front up there as well, like with the sway bar or whatever. It's actually carrying the nose. With no shock spring in there, you'll see that it's way down low. Now, I intentionally have these inverted because after 40 laps or so, they become equal. To start out with, though, I needed the right front lower because I have the asymmetry at 4 and whatever other reasons. Now, if we go back to the, if I hit F6 here, it takes you back. Watch this thing travel. We'll just start here. We'll just go into turn 1. This is the start-finish line. La 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 la. And fast forward. This thing slams down into turn 1. It rebounds a little, which you can see right here. So this is me slamming down. You come over the hill, slam down onto the track. My dog likes Harleys. You rebound up a little bit, and then the lift's like crazy. I've got to fix this. This is not good. This should be sitting down here. This is probably because I have the shocks on the bump at 32, if you look in the garage. So I have the, well, I guess I don't now. Took all that off. So we got to figure out why that's doing that. My suspicion was either the bumps and the shocks. It was even worse before when the shocks were at 32. But this packer is a problem because we're compressing the shock spring down probably 2 inches, and it's got energy, and as you come off the corner with less force, it's pushing the nose up like a bouncy ball or a foam ball. See it? This is the nose lifting back up. So it's lifting back up like 2 inches. It's a lot. You can see it in the replay too. All right, so you can see what's going on here. We're in the shock springs, and the yellow is the 500 pounds. We're in them. With a 5,000 pound, only the right front is really into the shock spring. Okay, so let's look at the replay. You'll see clear as day what's going on with this. So this is me coming into 1, just so you can know what's going on here. I have my Z value in the camera. There's a hotkey for this. I set my Z value down to 0 so I can be right on the track, so the camera's sitting right on it. And then a lot of times I might look from the chase view and I'll set that Z value down too. But you can only go so far. And then I'll look for daylight under here. So this thing is not going to come down to the ground because it's got the 5,000 pound packer in there. And you can see the exhaust. This thing is just not good. So watch what happens with this. So we're coming into the corner, watch it come down, slam the ground. See how the right front is lower than the left front? That's because of how I have the asymmetry, because I know after the fuel burns off, the tires get hot, this thing actually ends up the other way. So I'm kind of doing this on purpose. Which I might be hitting the track. Anyway, I got to sort that out, but this is by design. You can see how much lower the car is. Now I've taken a long time, like whatever this video is taking 15 minutes or something. This is a 3-minute process, start to finish. To get all this data in here, take your telemetry, it takes you more time to do the laps and than it does do anything. So I take the laps, take the telemetry, whatever, I load it up in here. I can look at this instantly and be like, oh my God, that 5,000 pound packer is bad news. Then I can look at the replay and be like, yep, that's for sure. This thing's sitting up in the air. No good. So what I wanted to do is just show you how that can be useful and show the relationship between the replay and the telemetry and the laps taken and the corresponding speeds. That's a full second, second and a tenth, just because the splitter's in La La Land and the car was tight as a dump truck because the right front was all bound up. So I hope you found that helpful. Okay, welcome back. So this video follows the previous video on, of course it follows the previous video, but the previous video on how to input springs from the garage. So
28.588. .91